Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon, and we got a lot to get into. It's the Week 9 preview show. Lots of college football action happening this week, and honestly, it's kind of a week that not a lot of people thought was going to be that crazy, but now we've got several ranked matchups and a lot of teams that probably weren't supposed to be ranked at the beginning of the season, but that's why they play the game, people. Navy, Vanderbilt, Boise State, Illinois, Indiana, all of these schools. If you would ask me at the beginning of the season, I'd say there's a pretty good chance that they weren't going to be ranked. Maybe Boise State, but definitely not the other ones. But that's why you play the game. That's why we got to talk about it. This is College Football Overtime. We're going to get into a whole lot of discussion here on the preview show. But before we do any of that, like I do every single week, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Garrett. We've already had one 20-plus point upset, Kennesaw State with a big win. This feels like a weekend where we might see one or two of those. And so one undefeated and Liberty has fallen. We'll see how many more.
Yeah, let's see. Let's start in the SEC, LSU at Texas A&M. Eerily similar starts for either of these teams. Both started the season with a loss to an out-of-conference opponent, USC and Notre Dame. Then they steadily improved throughout the course of the regular season, and they are undefeated in regular season play. And it's a bit of an inverted improvement. You have LSU, who took the big jump on defense. They just held Ole Miss to 26 points in that overtime win. Then they followed up with a 10-point performance against Arkansas. Well, they held Arkansas to 10 points. Blake Baker, his improvement on that side of the ball has been fantastic. It starts with their ability to get pressure on the quarterback. They're third in pressure rate, seventh in sacks, despite losing Harold Perkins for the season in week 4. And on offense, you know exactly who they are. It's Garrett Nussmeier. He's throwing the ball down the field. He's thrown it all over the yard. 5 300-yard games this season. Tigers ranked 8th nationally in passing offense, 322 yards per game, and he leads the SEC with 18 touchdowns. And I will say this about Texas A&M before I get into them. They're a bit untested. I'd say one of the best passing offenses that they face this year is probably Mississippi State. Not super awesome. They still found a way to find success against this secondary, and they've allowed 240 yards or more in 4 of their last 5 games. So that's going to be a big stepping point here for Texas A&M. They got to step up and stop Garrett Nussmeier. But then at Texas A&M, we talk about the inverted improvement. They took the jump on offense. We knew that the defense was going to be solid. We know that they're stopping opponents without bringing a lot of pressure. They're blitzing just 16% of the time, which is the 8th lowest mark in FBS. And I say that they found yardage, but they're not completing the ball at a high percentage. They're 10th best in completion percentage at 54% allowed. And then that helps them get off the field on third down because not a lot of people are finding a lot of success on the ground, but the same can't be said about that offense. Connor Wegman was inserted into the starting lineup after missing a couple of weeks due to injury, the opposite of energy. Marcel Reed stepped into that role, and he played admirably. We actually talked about how we were kind of surprised that they went back to Connor Wegman, but he shined against Missouri. And Le'Veon Moss, he's been a beast. He's had 5 touchdowns in his last 2 games. He shouldered a lot of the load. 218 yards per game. That's second in the SEC. They run the ball really well. And if you're LSU, you got to find a way to stop that run. That's the thing that's been kind of a killer for you this season. You can get after the passer, but this is not the type of team that's just going to want to drop back and pass. So lots of interesting things on the field, but off the field, these are the top 2 teams in the SEC, at least by the standings. So lots of storylines heading into this one, Abe.
Yeah, I don't care about the standings. I mean, and we know Georgia's the team to beat in the SEC. So, but I do think the winner of this game is going to start to, you start to look at that schedule and see where other SEC losses come from. And you start to see if someone who maybe isn't one of the 2 best teams in conference does find their way into the SEC tournament. The big question for A&M, the home team, is which Connor Wegman are you getting? You mentioned it against Missouri. I know he didn't throw for a touchdown, incredibly efficient, 18 of 22, and they had 5 rushing touchdowns. You swing that around though to Mississippi State, a road game, and threw 2 interceptions, and now they were still able to get 3 rushing touchdowns. So I think for Texas A&M, the question is going to be, do you need Connor Wegman to help you win this game? And if so, which version of Connor Wegman did you get? That Missouri thing came out of nowhere. I did not expect the offense to suit up under Connor Wegman and tally 41 points, and they did. Now, The question is it going to be good Connor Wegman or bad Connor Wegman? And you've gotten a little bit of both, and it's just that lack of consistency that makes you wonder which Texas A&M version you're going to get. And it's a very similar story for LSU and Garrett Nussmeier. I sat here 2 weeks ago talking about springboard this and springboard that. I thought they had an opportunity against Arkansas. It ain't going to be this easy. Texas A&M ain't got a wide open secondary that every team in the country has cut apart like Arkansas did. And so this does feel to me like a much more grinded out game. And the question is which team is more comfortable in that style? And I think just on the surface, it might be Texas A&M. You're going to ask Caden Durham, who's kind of been an unsung hero. He's going to have to show up because if it comes down to Nussmeier, I don't know if this is the game you want to put the ball on his shoulders and say, go win us this game. I think you're going to rely on what seems to be a consistently improving defense. Not necessarily a great defense, but they've been improving over the course of the year in the run game. I think you looked at Moss, you look at Caden Durham. Whichever team runs the ball better in this game, I think has a huge advantage. I don't think either team would like their quarterback to have to go win it. I think if you play smart and efficient, don't turn the ball over, there you go. The other aspect of this is going to be the crowd noise. It's going to be Kyle Field. What impact do they have on this one? Because, look, whether or not these are the two best teams in the SEC or not, this is, what is A&M ranked? 14. This is a top 15 matchup right now. Maybe higher than that, whatever A&M's ranked. The winner of this is squarely in position, even potentially with another loss, to still make the college football playoffs. This is a really big deal. This game's a really big deal, especially for LSU, knowing what schedule they have in front of them, but Texas A&M as well. They know they've got to end the year with Texas, and unless they want to put themselves in a situation where that game to end the season is must win, then they must win this one. So it is a really big game. It just feels like – and I hate to say this, Garrett, because it's such a boring, lazy excuse for analysis. And I understand that, but I'm still going to say it. Whichever team gets better quarterback play out of somewhat questionable quarterbacks is going to win this game. And I know that's boring, but that is the reality of it. I don't think either team can win this game specifically with their deep. Look, Georgia won last week with their defense, right? I don't think any of these teams can bring up that sort of effort where the quarterback play is almost irrelevant. And so who plays cleaner, who plays smarter, who plays more efficient, and then who gets support from the run game. And I'm kind of leaning towards that being LSU, if we're going to be honest. I really like the way Caden Durham has trended. I think Nussmeier has kept you more honest defensively than Wegman, maybe a little bit in recent weeks. And I think they can find balance. I'm interested to see if Texas A&M can.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And look, I think that I think both of these teams, despite the outcome, will have a very good shot, or at least a shot, of representing the SEC in the college football playoff. Both of these teams have interesting matchups later on down the season. I think this game is imperative for both of these teams because they won't be favored in a few of those matchups. Texas A&M has Texas to finish the season. LSU has Alabama later on this season. Granted, I think it's in Baton Rouge this year. But look, both of these teams need this game. And I think that the winner is squarely in the race for the college football playoff, if not locking in, not necessarily locking in. I don't want to use that term. Let's say the winner of this game squarely becomes one of the favorites to make the college football playoff. Let's put it that way. But I think the home field advantage is something in this rivalry that you have to highlight. Both of these teams play in a 100,000 plus person stadium. It's huge. It's a huge deal. And especially in this game where the home team has won every single game going back to 2017. Every single game has been won by the home team. Do you think that continues in this one? I have a hard time believing it doesn't, because the things that don't translate in the SEC generally are bad defense and quarterback play. If you rely squarely on your quarterback to come in and be the savior of your team, and you don't really trust your defense all that much, that doesn't generally translate very well in the SEC. Texas A&M has a massive advantage, but Texas A&M has also been in this sort of situation several times. This is the type of game that, look, if they're in this type of game, they fall on their face. That's what they've done in the past. And I don't think that this Texas A&M team has shown me anything different other than the fact that, look, they're a fine football team. They beat a very average Missouri team. I have to see it against an LSU team that at least is playing with a lot of confidence right now. LSU, on the other hand, I'm not a super big believer in them either, So I generally, if I'm picking this game, I'm going to likely trend towards home field advantage because it's been such an advantage in this series specifically. And the fact that LSU relies on a quarterback who throws a lot of interceptions, and you got a defense that doesn't stop the run. Now you're going up against an offense that runs the ball really well and forces a lot of turnovers. Is it that simple?
Well, I just don't know if I fully agree with you on what Texas A&M can provide offensively. I mean, when you look at offensively what they did against Mississippi State, yeah, they had 3 touchdowns on the ground. But did they really run the ball like that well? I mean,
their numbers
they
say that they're
totaled
second in the
buck
SEC
36, $136 as a team. I mean, they gave up 24 points to Mississippi State. They allowed Van Buren to have three passing touchdowns. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know what I'm more confident in. The Texas A&M defense to slow down LSU or the LSU defense to slow down A&M. And this is why Wegman being such a wild card really pops up. And that's what makes this discussion and analysis and, like, quite frankly, making a pick in this game so difficult.
Yeah.
Like, if you sat here and told me that, like, the Connor Wegman we saw against Missouri is what we're going to see on Saturday, like, it's a no-brainer. A&M's going to win this game. I just don't know if we're getting the guy that's 18 to 22 with no interceptions, or we're getting a guy that throws 2 interceptions to Mississippi State and keeps that ball club in the game. And so I do agree with you that the crowd noise needs to be a factor. If you're LSU, score early, try and take them out. I think that's certainly part of the game control you would like to see. This is a really interesting one. This is one of the few games that we've talked about. What are we, week 9 now, you said?
Week 9.
One of the few games where I don't have a strong lean. I've been wrong about my leans, right? I mean, there have been games where I thought one thing would happen and something totally different happened. I've been wrong, but at least I normally had a decent feel for this game. This is one of the few ones where I sit here as like, I wouldn't be surprised if LSU blew out A&M. I wouldn't be surprised if either team wins close, and I wouldn't be surprised if A&M blew out LSU. This game could go pretty much any which way it's going to go, and I don't know if I'd be surprised. Very few games really have me puzzled in the manner of this one. So I don't know. I guess LSU, like, that's what I'm going to make when we have college football game time. Maybe you can talk me out of it between now and then. I will find out, but this is a tough one to predict, but that's also what makes it so entertaining. There's such high stakes, right? Mm-hmm. This you mentioned, I mean, odds-on potential favorite to make the SEC title game, certainly an odds-on favorite to stay in the the college football playoff race. Mm-hmm. There's such high stakes, and I just don't know what to expect. That's super exciting for me.
Yeah, flip a coin. I think you have just as good odds to pick the winner right if you did that, or I don't know, provided a whole hell of a lot of analysis. This game just feels like it's a roll of the dice, and that's why I side with home field, just because I think it's that valuable in the SEC. And I'm with you. It's a hard feel, but it's such high stakes for two teams who I don't feel are in that top rung of the SEC this year. I think Alabama's trended down. I think Ole Miss has trended down. Missouri was never quite in that category right there. But then Texas A&M and LSU kind of make up those other two teams in that little B level of the SEC. And that top level, of course, is still Texas and it's still Georgia. We'll see who else fills up, and maybe they end up playing in an SEC championship game, but that's why you play the game. But I tend to agree with you, Abe. I have a hard time picking this game. I don't really have much of a feel. But again, that's why I side with home field advantage. And I guess that's going to be the biggest difference maker in this game. But entertaining as hell. I think that's a good way to describe it. Another game that's going to be entertaining as hell, Boise State and UNLV. Oh, baby. Ashton Genty, the front runner for the Heisman Trophy, in my opinion. And then you have two teams who I'd say are in the driver's seat towards the 12-team playoff. You could talk about Army. You can talk about Navy. All you want. I think Boise State and UNLV are just better football teams. I think that's just what it comes down to. And I think this is going to be one of those opportunities where they can prove it. The winner of this one will take a giant step towards that group of 5 bid. Boise State's 5-1 on the season. UNLV's 6-1 on the season. Both are 2-0 in conference play. I think they're both really, really fun. I just think they're both really good football teams. And Barry Odom has done a damn good job over there with UNLV. They don't have quite as much margin for error, in my opinion, as Boise State does. They had that overtime loss to Syracuse. Just not as good looking of a loss as a last-second loss to Oregon. And you also have Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty is going to be fun. This is a midweek game, or I guess it's a Friday night game. I guess any game that's not on Saturday to me is a midweek game, but it's a Friday night game. But Ashton Jeanty, if you have not seen him, make sure you're watching on Friday night. It's a late kick, so at least get some of the energy out. Watch some of this game. This game is going to be a lot of fun. What do you think?
Well, a couple things here. I do think the winner of this game takes probably a huge step towards being the Group of 5 representative, especially if it's Boise State. I know they've already got the ranking. They're going to have the best loss of any Group of 5. So now you're going to have to ask someone to go undefeated. But a last-second loss at Oregon is going to stack up well compared to anyone else. But look, UNLV comes in with Haj Malik Williams after they had their whole situation with the quarterback a couple weeks ago, and the offense has gotten better since then. And it feels like they're going to have to score in this one to keep up. I don't know if this is necessarily the game. And look, the Group of 5 implications are what they are. We've talked about that. The Heisman implications are heavy as well. I don't know if this is the game where a team stops or slows down Ashton Jeanty. I am interested to see how Boise State handles that. If they do run into a situation where he just can't get going and they have to rely on other aspects of the offense. Selfishly, I hope I never see that because I just enjoy watching him pound 66-yard runs for you know what I mean? Like it's fun to watch him bounce out and take contact and then outrun everyone. And so selfishly, I hope we don't have to see that. But the analyst aspect to me does wonder how they fare if someone can bottle him up a little bit. And we'll see if UNLV is going to be that team. But you're right. I mean, these are two teams in the Mountain West who are 1-2 right now in that conference, and they're going to have a straight front run, in my opinion, to the berth out of the Group of 5. And so I'm very interested to see how it breaks down. It's a fun one. Like you said, it is late, but it's worth staying up for.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think Ashton Jeanty is fun. And you talked about what do they do without Ashton Jeanty? Well, Maddox Madsen has been a really solid quarterback, I will say. Doesn't have the sexy numbers that I would say that a lot of the elite quarterbacks do. He's not really one of those guys. But look, he's the perfect kind of quarterback to put alongside an Ashton Jeanty. He's going to complete a high number of passes. He's going to keep the offense moving if they need to throw the ball. And you look at it, you talk about why they lost the one game that they lost this season. It's because they smothered their wide receivers and he only completed 17 of 40 passes against Oregon. Because Ashton Jeanty still went off in that game. So it's just one of those types where you kind of just got to let Ashton Jeanty get his, and then try to take out that passing game and make them as one-dimensional as possible. Obviously, you're not just going to let him run, but you can't overcommit to stop Ashton Jeanty because he's going to get his. It's just one of those things. He's going to go for 3 bills, and you just have to shut down Maddox Madsen. That's really the path to victory in this one, but this game's going to be a shootout. So if you just want to watch a lot of fun offense, then this is a great game for you. Boise State's third in scoring offense. They're averaging 46 points per game, almost 47 points per game. UNLV is fifth, 43.5 points per game. Broncos are second in rushing. Rebels are fifth in rushing. Boise State has an average output of 523 yards per game. They're going to put up a lot of points. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be some Friday night fireworks. But let's move into Saturday, another game that is going to be very entertaining for different reasons. Two teams trending in the wrong direction. It's Missouri and it's Alabama. Both teams need to win this football game. Both have fallen out of grace a little bit. They were preseason top 10s. Alabama's entering November with 2 losses for the first time since 2007. You could say multiple losses because they could add another one here on Saturday. But Missouri's injury riddled. They're just completely and totally beat up. Brady Cook and Nate Noel. Brady Cook's out. Nate Noel is a game time decision, but he's trending towards not playing. But I think this just is a really compelling matchup, if not just for desperation's sake.
Yeah, I just think the injuries are going to be a bit too much for Missouri to overcome. And so I do think Alabama's going to win this game. But I'm very interested to see if they can take any steps forward or what maybe they figured out or learned from the last couple of games. Even the wins have come by in a tough manner for Alabama. So very interested to see if they look any different, if there's any more juice to what we have there at Bryant Denny, because it just something has gone off the rails, and I don't know what necessarily it is. I still tend to think that Jalen Milroe is not 100% healthy, and maybe that's part of the limitations on the offense. That's just me throwing that out there. I don't have any actual information on that, but it feels like something is limiting him. It doesn't make sense why the offense would be so shut down with anyways. So I think the injuries are too much for Missouri. It would be a heck of a win if they could win down a quarterback on the road at Alabama. But I just don't see it coming that way. So I'm more interested to see if Alabama can kind of get a little bit of spark back in their life.
Yeah, it's a team that has not really looked the same since piling on 28 points in the first half against Georgia. I mean, UGA dumped on them in the second half, almost 400 yards in that second half, and they just haven't looked the same. I mean, you struggle defensively against Vandy in South Carolina, and then your offense just goes kaput against Tennessee. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with Jalen Milroe. He hasn't played at a high level, just hasn't. 5 interceptions in his last 3 games. He was sacked multiple times against Tennessee, and he hasn't been running the ball well. I mean, to your point, I mean, you say he's not healthy. I can't say that one way or the other, but he's turning the ball over and he's not running the ball. I don't know if that's coaching. I don't know if it's, to your point, an injury, but it's been very bad for this offense because the rushing attack has not been able to pick up. Justice Haynes and Jim Miller have been okay, if not unspectacular, in that rushing attack, and they just haven't provided any support for Jalen Milroe. And then on top of that, you penalties. You had 15 penalties against Tennessee. That's unacceptably bad. They're 9 per game. It's 5th worst in all of college football. But again, you're playing an injury-riddled Missouri team that's down its best 2 players outside of Luther Burden. I mean, Brady Cook and Nate Noel are critical to what they want to do. Eli Drinkwitz, he wants to run the ball. That's a very important thing to him. And Marcus Carroll hopefully can fill in that void just a little bit because this rush defense for Alabama, they've allowed 200-yard rushing games, very anti-Alabama style. It's left a lot to be desired. And Marcus Carroll, if they win this game, it's because Marcus Carroll willed them to do so. But Drew Pine, he's a veteran quarterback at the very least. He's not going to make any back-breaking, disastrous decisions necessarily that like maybe a freshman or a sophomore who's making a first or second start would. But now he's starting at Bryant Denny Stadium, a place that's been a fortress for Alabama since 2007. They've only lost 6 times there. And I just have a hard time thinking that Missouri has a great shot. But if they can shut down the Alabama rushing attack, which effectively it's done to itself over recent weeks, 75 rushing yards in his last game against Tennessee. Milroe was pressured 24 times, and he threw the ball. What was it, like 45 times, 46 times, something like that against Tennessee? That's not a recipe to win a lot of football games, especially when you're throwing interceptions and not completing the ball at the high rate. You're a big play offense, and it's not completing the big play right now. I thought that was going to be enough to win against Tennessee, but it was nowhere to be found. And I mean, the other thing that really works in their favor is the fact that Missouri's 7-0 in one-score games. So this is just sort of an ugly game. And I think Alabama is just a better football team. They're just more talented. And at least they have their quarterback at the end of the day. But any more thoughts on this one, Abe? All right, let's move into another one out there in the Pacific Northwest, because that's now the Big Ten. The Oregon Ducks. They get the cool uniforms, and now they get another Illinois team that might try to steal that title of cool uniforms after what they did last week against Michigan. But Oregon's rolling right now. They just beat Ohio State. Great. And then they follow it up with a beatdown of Purdue, 35-0 in that one. They seem like they're just getting better as the weeks go on. And that's what good college football teams should do. Dillon Gabriel, he's continued to elevate his play. He's been that guy every single week. 77% completion percentage. He's got 19 total touchdowns. He is still turning the ball over a little bit. I don't know if he did in that beatdown against Purdue, but Jordan James has been a monster in that backfield, and that certainly helps. It's 717 yards and 8 tutties for him. And this wide receiver core has just continued to roll. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart's really picked up here as of late, 245 yards in his last 2 games. Trayshawn Holden, he was suspended for that spitting incident against Ohio State. We'll see if he ends up playing. It was a interdisciplinary thing, according to Dan Lanning. He may or may not play in this one, but Illinois, they've been kind of a not very sexy winner, but they've done it against ranked opponents. This is their fourth ranked opponent, or their fifth ranked opponent on the season. They're 3-1 in those games. They beat Kansas, they beat Nebraska, they beat Michigan. Only lost was a top 10 opponent in Michigan or Penn State. Luke Altmaier's been solid. Pat Bryant and Zach Franklin, they've dominated his attention. 50% of his catches, 55% of his yardage and touchdowns. We'll see if it translates on the road against Oregon. It didn't against Penn State, but they've won in several different ways, and they'll need to play probably their best game of the season if they want to have a chance in this one.
Yeah, look, Illinois offensively is good. They're not great. And I think it is going to take a stronger offensive side to keep pace with Oregon. I think their defense is good, but they're not great. And I just don't know if there's enough to slow Oregon down or to keep pace with them, especially on the road. And so I think Oregon can start to run a couple games off here based on their schedule. The question, or just something I'll be paying attention to, is feels like Dylan Gabriel is kind of still hanging on the outskirts of a Heisman discussion. He's got to start to put together some big games, and he's doing this one against a ranked opponent. We'll see if he makes any movement in the Heisman discussion. I think it's going to be tough to catch Genty and Hunter right now. But if anyone can, it might be Gabriel. But I just think Oregon's a little too much. I think they're just a bit too much for the Illini. It's going to take a Herculean effort on both sides of the ball, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to get that.
Yeah, it's going to be a damn near perfect game. That's what it's going to require if Illinois is going to want to win this game. But Luke Altmaier, if you can come out and be dominant, if you can come out and be just a really, really, really the best version of yourself, anything's possible in this sport. We've seen some crazy stuff happen. It wouldn't be the first time a number one team has lost to a team that a lot of people thought was inferior. At least this is a top 25 opponent. We've seen them play at a high level before. I'd be hard-pressed to think that they end up doing it at that level again, but we shall see. That's why they play the game. Another game, another team that we did not really expect to be a really dominant team is the Naval Academy. The Midshipmen are ranked in the top 25 for the first time since 2019, and now they get their boogeyman. It's Notre Dame. They're playing over at MetLife Stadium, and really, for Navy, this is their first big opportunity. They had their win against Charlotte last week. Charlotte's not really going to move the needle for me. I understand you do what you're supposed to do, and you beat their brains in. But Greg Horvath, he's led this dramatically improved squad. He led this kind of offense in high school, and it shows. He's had 10 touchdowns running and passing. He's been a pretty dynamic offensive threat here for the Midshipmen. They're averaging 44 points per game, 435 total yards, 274 of that are coming on the ground. So this is not exactly your prototypical Navy offense. It's not just that ground and pound, but they'll still beat you there if you let them. But Notre Dame, this is by far and away, not even remotely close, the biggest test for Navy this season.
Yeah, and I think that's what you really have to boil it down to is how prepared are they for a team like Notre Dame that is just, no disrespect to the rest of their schedule, going to be more physical than everyone else. And you have got to fight through that physicality, and you've got to find big plays. I think when you look at these teams that run the option, run triple option like Army, like Navy, and you've got to base it on the fact that you can't drive up and down the field the entire game. You've got to find chunk plays, and that's the question you're going to ask of Navy. Is that there for them against Notre Dame? Look, when you compare Army and Navy, Army just does things better. And I think Army's got a better chance to beat Notre Dame later in the season than Navy does, even though this one's at home. I just don't think Notre Dame is going to sleepwalk into this one. I think it's a slightly different situation than it was against Northern Illinois. I think they're going to be ready. I think they're going to be up for this game. And I think that they've been physical. They've stopped the run decently well. You talked about it when we were heading into the Georgia Tech Notre Dame game last week. They got some guys missing in their secondary. Maybe a passing team could do a little more damage. A running team, it's not going to be as impacted. It's just not a great matchup. It's just not a great matchup for Navy. Notre Dame's been playing a lot better since the Northern Illinois game. Just feel like the Irish are out to put a statement first to Navy and then potentially down the road to Army.
Yeah, and this is also a game that Notre Dame plays every year. It's one of those types of games that I get a little irritated with Notre Dame because they've won this game, what, like 82 of their last 96 times. They've played damn near every single year since 1927, except for that COVID season. And it's rarely a football game. I'm hoping that this is a competitive football game. Navy's been a really fun story this year, and Notre Dame's playing both Army and Navy this year, so maybe one of them can pull it out. Uh, we'll see. I think the odds are absolutely stacked against them. They just need a lot of things to go their way, and if you face a kind of one of these dynamic offenses, and they can do a little bit more than just run the ball, Abe. But Notre Dame, Riley Leonard, that offense is just going to pound. And it's another one of those types of games. We saw them do it against Georgia Tech last week. All they really have to do in this game is just lean forward. They're bigger, they're faster, they're more physical, they're stronger. Just lean forward, and they should get a positive result that they want to see. Let's keep it. Let's move over to back over to the Big Ten here. What do you say? It's Washington at your alma mater, Indiana, and it's the home of Week 9's College Game Day for the first time ever, right? I think that is the first time ever. If it's not the first time, I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure it's the first time ever. Indiana's not exactly a powerhouse. I mean, look, they're undefeated for the first time since 1967, but this is a Washington team. Been a little up and down for them this year, but not at Husky Stadium. They're undefeated at Husky Stadium this year, 4-0 there, 0-3 when they leave. But that's going to be a very interesting sort of factor here for them. The Hoosiers, they're leaning on a backup quarterback, Taven Jackson. They're hoping that he can keep him undefeated. It's his sixth career start for a team that scored 40-plus points in 6 consecutive games. Curtis Rourke broke his thumb last week, but when he was healthy, this offense was one of the very best in the country. They're number 5 in total offense, number 5 in third down conversion percentages. Justin Ellison's been strong. Ty Lawton's been strong. They can do a lot of different things, and they can throw, they can pass, or they can run, they can pass. But this Huskies unit, I mean, they're good on defense. They're a little bit more inconsistent on offense. Will Rogers has been solid, but the defense has been effective. Third in pass efficiency defense, 8th in total defense, 16th in scoring defense. They've been able to do a lot of good things here. A little bit inconsistent with Jed Fish's first season, but Indiana, without their starting quarterback, let's see what they can do.
Yeah, look, there's 3 questions Indiana needs to answer, and if they answer, certainly if they answer all 3 of them, they're going to win this game. But even if they answer just 2 of them, they got a good shot. The first question you mentioned, Taven Jackson, how does the offense fare with a backup quarterback? I know he was red hot when he came in against Nebraska, but now that you've got a week, and sometimes the moment hits you a little bit differently than when you just get randomly thrust in there and a little bit of tape. Maybe Washington can kind of study up a little bit. So how do they fare with a backup quarterback, Taven Jackson? Number 2, do you get the same sort of defensive effort you gave against Nebraska? That was the most revealing aspect of a fixed 56-7 win. Wasn't the offense. The offense has been in the 40s, 50s, maybe high 30s all season long. The defense necessarily has not. And so do you get that effort? And then are you ready for the moment? There is no flying under the radar anymore. Indiana's into the top 20. They have College Game Day. They're one of the last undefeated teams left. They're above the radar. They're on the radar. They're not under the radar anymore. Are they ready for the moment? Are they ready? How do they handle the attention? If they can answer those 3 things, they're going to get another win and stay undefeated.
Yeah, and look, these are the types of games that ranked teams are supposed to win. You know, teams who go and play for a college football playoff or represent their conference in a college football playoff, they win these games. You know, and most of the time they leave no doubt. And if you are one of those types, if you want to prove that you belong with the elites in the Big Ten Conference this season, you win this game, and you do it convincingly. And I think even if you lose like important players, you're supposed to be that team. And Indiana and with Kurt Cignetti, it's been a fun story, but let's see if it's a real story. I think we're going to learn a little bit more. This isn't their big test. They've got another big test coming to them down the road. But look, you got to weather the storm. The storm gets a little bit more bumpy here in the second half of your season. And this is where the going starts. Well, last week was really where we said the going got tough. You handled that test with flying colors. You passed it pretty easily. Now you get a new one. Now you get a separate one you get a new one in Washington, and you get an additional one doing so without your starting quarterback. But I think this is that type of game. Let's see if they show up. the hype is there, but now they got to deliver. But final one here on our slate, Abe Gordon, a matchup of ranked teams. No, that's not a typo. Vanderbilt is ranked in the top 25. So are the Texas Longhorns, of course, even though they lost an ugly one to Georgia last week. Theoretically, both of these teams are in the SEC championship game hunt. How does Texas respond after their loss last week to Georgia? This is their first SEC road game. Not really your prototypical SEC environment necessarily, but Vandy generally provides a unique sort of atmosphere in the antithesis of the word, So you have teams who travel up there. Just doesn't ever seem like there's a lot of buzz up there. Maybe there is. We'll see, because they're actually rolling right now. They're ranked number 25 in the country. Maybe they get some attention now. And this is also Texas's only ranked opponent until they finish the season with Texas A&M. So you talk about the layup of a schedule that Texas have. Wasn't quite as much of a layup now that you have Vanderbilt rolling in the way that they do. They've won 3 straight games, and they're playing at a really high level. We know what they're going to want to do. Diego Pavia is the guy. He's been a revelation for them. They do it with ball control. They have the ball for 33 minutes per game. It's 11th in the country. That's behind some triple option teams. That's how good they've been. And they do it because they convert third downs. They're 52% there. And Pavia doesn't turn the ball over. In fact, they're tied for first among Power 4 programs this season, and they've only lost 2 turnovers. I mean, this is not a team that turns it over. They convert on third down. That sounds like a recipe for an upset type of team. Now, it's a different type of test. You got Texas coming in there. They'll match you and surpass you and then lap you with that team speed that they have on defense. This isn't the type of team that you're just going to be able to come out and surprise, because Vanderbilt's not creeping up on anybody anymore. But if they can hold on to the football, then they'll at least give themselves a chance. If you hold the ball for long periods of time, you shrink the game, you shorten the amount of time, and you shrink the possessions. That's a recipe for success generally. But Texas isn't that type of defense. And I don't necessarily think that this is going to be that kind of game where you're going to be able to do that kind of thing. And then on the Texas side, I mean, Steve Sarkisian insists there's no quarterback controversy. I believe him. Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback out there. But my question is he 100% healthy? Has kind of had 2 duds of a performance, one against Mississippi State. Maybe it was just rust. And then the second one you can explain away because you played an elite Georgia defense. But they have been slow out of the gate. They've scored just 1 touchdown in the first quarter over the last 3 games, and they were shut out in the last 2. So we will see what happens in this one. But Vanderbilt not sneaking up on anybody. Texas, I want to see how they respond.
Yeah, well, Vanderbilt's going to do whatever they're going to do. I don't really care about them. They're not the story here. The question is, what do we see about Texas? Because we're still left not knowing just how good this Texas team is, right? Like we had questions coming into Georgia. They obviously flatlined against Georgia and didn't show us any reason to believe that they're capable of competing for a national championship. I'm still questioning what exactly they are, and I think they can show us by going on the road to, yes, a ranked Vanderbilt team, and maybe winning a big game. And if they lose that game, like obviously hat tip to Vanderbilt, and we'll talk about it in the recap, what Vandy did to Ness. But like, I'm not even talking about like X's and O's and how they match up. I'm talking about just the storyline. I'm not trying to discredit Vanderbilt, but like, we'll talk about Vanderbilt on the back end in the recap show. Well, you will. I'm on vacation, but yeah, thanks. But they'll have their time in the sunshine if they're able to win this game. But the story, like what I'm interested, because when we talk about this, sometimes I give like analysis of the game and the matchups, but sometimes it's just about what I'm interested out of the game. And what I'm interested out of this game is just what is Texas, because we really don't know yet. Still, after that Georgia game, we still believe Texas is very good. Georgia was better. I want to find out just how good Texas is. And if they go into Vanderbilt and lose this game, like, you can cross them off the list as well. If they go into Vanderbilt and dominate and do things that a team like Texas or Georgia should do, whether Vanderbilt's ranked or not, we can start to have that discussion again of all right, what do they do moving forward to be better to beat Georgia? But I'm interested in trying to find out a little bit more about this Texas team. And again, I'm not trying to discredit Vanderbilt. It's just what I'm interested in. From the X's and O's standpoint, you're right. Quinn Ewers has to be better. Sarkisian said this is one of the best weeks of practice that Quinn Ewers has ever had. I mean, okay, like, you're trying to pick a quarterback up after a rough go. Sure. I don't think necessarily having a great practice week leads into a game, nor do I think necessarily having an awful practice week means you're not going to perform. And so we'll see. I do agree with you. There's no quarterback controversy. Now lose this game and we might have a discussion, but right now there's not.
Yeah, I mean, Brent Key talked about having a great week of practice last week leading into the Notre Dame game. A good week of practice doesn't guarantee a great game on Saturday. A bad week of practice certainly does guarantee a not so good performance generally, right? So a good week of practice only gives you an opportunity to perform at a high level. I look, Quinn Ewers in this offense, we know what Texas is to some extent. We don't know who they are against the best.
We? Yeah.
Against elite teams, no. But Vanderbilt's not an elite team. Like, this isn't Oregon. This isn't Ohio State. This is Georgia.
Vanderbilt might still be the second best team they've played.
Team. Like, they're a good team. They're a team with a strong identity. But the thing is, if Texas starts fast, this isn't a competition. It's over. Like, I think Vandy's a good football team, but they have one solid identity. It's hold on to the football. It's what beat Virginia Tech earlier this season. It's what beat Alabama. It's what beat Kentucky. But it's also the team that lost to Georgia State because they got jumped on. You know, if they get taken out of their game plan, they don't really have much of a reaction. And Texas is by far the best team not by far. It's the best team that they faced this season. Alabama
should be. Yeah, they should be the best team. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. If Texas has problems in this game, then I think we have to have a very serious discussion about what Texas is. If Texas does what we expect them to in this game, or at least I guess what I expect them to in this game, then I think this is just going to be a blip on the radar. We'll talk about it on Sunday, and then we'll move on. Vanderbilt's been a fun story, just like Navy's been a fun story, like Army's been a fun story. Great. Until they do it with any level of consistency, it's just a fun story. And that's unfortunately their reality. And it's fun to talk about Vandy as a top 25 team. It's fun to talk about them being ranked, technically tied for second in terms of the SEC title race. Are they actually a contender? No, of course not. Let's not fool ourselves. And I mean that with all due respect to Diego Pavia and that program. I like Vanderbilt. I'm fine with Vanderbilt, but we'll see. We'll see. Do it against Texas, and we will firmly be in that believer chair. But let's finish up our week. We got our week 9 shout-outs. I went first last time, Abe Gordon, but so send it to you, man. What you got?
Oh, you giving me the layup. I appreciate it. I mentioned them once, but Kennesaw State on Wednesday night, knocking off previously unbeaten Liberty. First FBS win in school history for Coach Brian Bohannon. Huge win, national TV. Had to win it twice because they put a second back on the clock and had to make another game-ending play, and all was easy and all was done. Just a huge win for that program. They had been one of the upper echelon FCS programs for a couple years and been a slow start. Been a real slow start here at the FBS level. Previously winless, and I saw some stat about teams that are 0-5 or 0-6 beating teams that are 5-0 or 6-0, and it hadn't happened, and blah 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 blah. So just a huge win. I think it's the second biggest upset of the season in terms of a Vegas point total. I think they were maybe 25 or 26, 27 point dogs. I think Northern Illinois and Notre Dame was maybe 29. So just a huge shout out to the Kennesaw State football program.
Yeah, hooty-hoo. Huge win. And honestly, thank you for doing that, because that's the Liberty team that we all knew we were going to have if they made a college football playoff. And I'm so unbelievably grateful that we will not have to see Liberty in the college football playoff. They don't play a legitimate schedule, and they got what they deserved. And ultimately, maybe I'm being harsh on Liberty, but they don't play a legitimate schedule. They feast off of lower competition throughout the course of the season, and then they get embarrassed whenever they play a legitimate football team. In fact, the best team that they played all year was, or at least had on their schedule, game got canceled. And that's a team that lives at the bottom of the Sun Belt East right now in App State. Let's move into my shout out here. Syracuse at Pitt. I talked about Ashton Genty and Boise State being the game of the week, midweek games, or the non-Saturday games. Syracuse and Pittsburgh is going to be wild. It just has all the makings of it, because the Panthers, they're quietly undefeated in the ACC. It's them, it's Clemson, and it's Miami in the unbeaten category. Is SMU undefeated, actually, now that I'm thinking about it? I don't think they are, but we'll see. We'll see. It just kind of ruined. I stepped all over myself there, but SMU's in that sort of breath, I guess. But Pitt is undefeated. Undefeated. It's just they've been Miami in the conference. that are fully undefeated. And almost all of their games seem to come down to the wire. And the same can be said about Syracuse. Since they lost to Stanford, 4 of their last 5, they've been thrillers. Kyle McCord does it all for the Orange. He's going to light up the yard. And you have Pittsburgh, who's allowing almost 250 yards per game. This has the makings of a wild game. So keep your eyes out on the Pittsburgh Panthers. They might be just a little bit more fun than we all previously thought. Maybe Syracuse gives them a little bit more than they bargained for. But look, this is a fantastic week of college football. It's an unpredicted week of college football. A lot of the teams that we thought we'd be talking about, we're not talking quite so much about. Now, instead, we're talking about the Pittsburgh Panthers. We're talking about the Navy Midshipmen, the Vanderbilt Commodores, the Indiana Hoosiers, everything. That's why you follow this wonderful game of college football. We love it so much. I hope you do too. Well, I know you do too because you're listening to this podcast. So make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, follow along on Twitter at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon. If you're watching on Twitter, thank you so much for following along, or head on over to our YouTube. We do it there every single week, twice a week. Like and subscribe, follow along. We talk all things college football. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. We are College Football Overtime. I will see you again very soon. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you soon.